Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Thank you for joining us. In a moment, you will hear from Assistant Secretary Lee Satterfield from the Bureau of Educational and Cultural Affairs at the U.S. Department of State. Now, thanks to a very early partnership with the department and the U.S. Consular Service, IIE is fortunate to have over 100 years of data on international student mobility to the United States. We began taking a census of international students and scholars in 1920, and that data takes us through 12 pandemics, starting with the 1918-1920 Spanish influenza. During each, academic exchanges continued, and when public health conditions permitted, rapidly resumed, and then exceeded pre-pandemic levels. The data sets we will share today are fully consistent with this pattern, and they demonstrate the commitment by international students to studying here and by U.S. colleges and universities to keeping their doors open. Now it's my privilege to turn the floor over to Assistant Secretary Satterfield, who knows firsthand the value of these open doors and what they bring to U.S. campuses and to American public diplomacy.
On behalf of President Biden and Secretary Blinken, welcome to the Open Doors 2022 Report on International Education Exchange, the annual kickoff event for International Education Week. Before we get started, I want to thank Dr. Alan Goodman and the entire Institute of International Education team for their partnership and expertise in compiling, researching, and analyzing the Open Doors data. Also, special thanks to the U.S. colleges and universities that responded to the Open Doors survey and provided essential data from their campuses. We could not produce this report without your support. I'm Lee Satterfield, the Assistant Secretary of State for Educational and Cultural Affairs. Open Doors is the premier data resource for the U.S. government, the global higher education community, the business sector, governments of other countries, and anyone who follows the trends in international student enrollments and the number of Americans studying abroad. This year's International Education Week theme is Open for Opportunity. And as the Open Doors data conveys, students and scholars are beginning to re-engage in international education as we move beyond the COVID-19 global health pandemic. While Open Doors is a by-the-numbers kind of report, I also want to acknowledge how impactful, life-changing, if you will, international education exchange can be, both for students and for scholars, as well as the campuses and communities they visit. As President Biden has said, our nations are linked by deeply rooted shared values that unlock incredible opportunities. But the principal driver of our relationship is a connection between our people. International education is undoubtedly a foundational pillar of our people-to-people diplomacy work to support broader U.S. foreign policy goals. We see that every day, from the American students who study abroad to learn critical languages, to welcoming international Fulbright scholars to conduct research at a historically Black college and university. While past Open Doors reports have shown clear trends around the COVID-19 global health pandemic's impact, specifically historic decreases in international education exchange around the world, this year's data show that we're beginning to see a marked rebound in the number of international students traveling to the United States. In fact, the Open Doors data report that new international student enrollments, meaning new international students enrolling for the first year of study here, went up nearly 80% in the 2021-2022 academic year. And the total number of international students in the United States is on the rise toward the pre-pandemic levels. What does this mean and why does this matter? The expansion of international education exchange in the United States is real. 44 out of 50 states saw an increase of over 50% in the new international student enrollment from the previous year. Also, in addition to being value-added members of the U.S. educational institutions, both on campus and in the community, international students in the United States pumped an additional $32 billion into the U.S. economy, helping to create jobs and support livelihoods for Americans all over the country. 300,000 jobs, in fact. Study in the U.S. can be a life-changing opportunity, and I encourage every international student thinking about their study abroad options to come study with us. Here at home, the impacts of the COVID-19 health pandemic affected campuses nationwide, as many U.S. colleges and universities took action to prioritize global health, as well as the health and safety of both their American and international students. In doing so, many temporarily suspended their study abroad programs, and the 2020-2021 U.S. study abroad numbers reflect that reality. The global health pandemic did, however, spark innovation across higher education and learning, with institutions pursuing new ways to keep American students globally engaged through virtual offerings. Now, as Americans return to in-person study abroad, the department is providing a host of opportunities to increase diversity of students going abroad. For example, we've expanded access to study abroad through the Benjamin Gilman Scholarship, which supports Pell Grant recipients who want to study abroad. Also, Secretary Blinken and Dr. Antonio Flores of the Hispanic Association of Colleges and Universities recently expanded our joint efforts to encourage more Hispanic and Latino Americans to study abroad. These are vital tools to encourage more U.S. students to study abroad and to give the world a glimpse of just how rich America's diversity truly is. Without a doubt, there is collectively more opportunity to inspire and increase the number of international students studying in the United States, as well as Americans studying abroad. The 2022 Open Doors Report shows that international education exchanges are on the rebound. And yes, there is more work to do. The Biden-Harris administration remains committed, both in policy and in practice, to international education and ensuring doors of opportunity are open to all. It's now my honor to introduce Secretary of State Blinken and Secretary of Education Cardona.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining the Department of State and the Department of Education for International Education Week. When international students and scholars come to the United States, and when Americans study abroad, they bring their talents, perspectives, and cultures to their new communities. And when they work with peers to advance research and knowledge, they spark innovation and forge bonds across borders that can last a lifetime. Ties like these are vital to working together to tackle global challenges, from combating climate change and pandemics, to broadening economic opportunity, to standing up for human rights and democracy. Simply put, international education is a crucial part of our diplomacy and our national security. It's also a transformational experience. Studying abroad as a teenager helped me to see my own country through others' eyes, a perspective I carry to this day. That's why, as COVID-19 disrupted global travel, we worked hard to preserve these opportunities to learn and grow together. Thanks to the ingenuity of our partners and our participants, we found new ways to keep collaborating, including ones that will make lasting components of our programs. For example, we expanded our Critical Language Scholarship to include a virtual version of the program called CLS Spark. This way, immersive classes on Arabic, Russian, and Chinese are available to more undergraduate students in the United States. Now, as we recover from the pandemic, our exchange programs are bouncing back too. Over the last academic year, the number of newly enrolled international students in the United States increased by 80%, as we welcomed almost 950,000 students to campuses across our country. In the years ahead, will continue promoting study abroad programs in the United States and for American students. Last summer, the Department of State and the Department of Education released a joint statement in support of international education, setting out goals to deepen our assistance for these efforts. Since then, we've doubled the length of exchange visas for STEM students doing practical training in the United States, and doubled the number of grants to American institutions as they diversify their study abroad programs. Recently, we also signed an MOU with the Hispanic Association of Colleges and Universities to support more Hispanic and Latino students studying overseas. None of this would be possible without our partners in higher education at community colleges, four-year universities, minority-serving institutions, and more. Thank you for all that you do to welcome international visitors and send Americans abroad. For our students and scholars, here at home and across the globe, I hope this week inspires you to study abroad. I'm confident that it will change you and our world for the better. And with the many programs the State Department offers, from the Gilman Scholarship to the Fulbright program, I hope you consider studying abroad with us. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Secretary of Education Miguel Cardona. It's International Education Week. I'm proud that every year all of us at the Department of Education join our colleagues at the State Department and school communities across the globe to reaffirm our shared commitment to ensure students succeed in today's interconnected world. Learning about and appreciating diverse languages, experiences, and viewpoints enriches our lives. It also enables our students to build essential global and cultural competencies and to deepen their social, emotional, critical thinking, and collaboration skills. This can broaden our students' worldviews in ways that make them even more excited about their learning. I often say that being multilingual and multicultural are superpowers. These are assets that make our kids and our country even stronger. International exchanges are a big part of developing global and cultural competencies for U.S. students who study abroad and for communities here in the U.S. who welcome international students to their schools and to their homes. Last year, the Departments of Education and State announced our commitment to work together and with other U.S. government agencies to promote the importance of international exchange and education. We did that through our joint statement of principles in support of international education. That's because we recognize that U.S. students, educators, and researchers benefit when they engage with peers from around the world. And we know the presence of international students in our schools and on our college campuses strengthens our education system and our economy. This International Education Week and every day, America is open for opportunity. We warmly welcome international students. I encourage everyone who is interested to explore opportunities to study abroad or engage in international internships, teaching experiences, or research, including through the many exchange programs we offer through the U.S. government. Thank you. We're excited to see how you celebrate International Education Week this year.
Thank you, and happy International Education Week.
Hello, and thank you for attending the Open Doors 2022 annual data release. My name is Mirka Martel, and today you will hear the newest Open Doors data from our Research, Evaluation, and Learning team at the Institute of International Education. With my colleagues Julie Baer and Leah Mason, we will present data on international students at U.S. higher education institutions, U.S. students studying abroad, and key trends in global student mobility. I will begin my presentation with data on international students. Let's start by providing an overview of the International Student Census. As in previous years, the census surveyed nearly 3,000 U.S. higher education institutions that reported hosting international students in the Student and Exchange Visitor Information System, or SEVIS. Colleges and universities that report to Open Doors represent every state and U.S. territory, and some have been reporting to the project for close to 75 years. Next, who is counted in the census? Open Doors data includes international students attending classes at U.S. colleges and universities in person or online. It also includes students on optional practical training or OPT. And finally, what is the time frame represented in Open Doors 2022? We collected data from U.S. institutions as of fall 2021 to reflect the 2021-22 academic year. Following a year of hybrid learning due to the COVID-19 pandemic, most institutions in fall 2021 began the academic year in person, and many international students already in the United States returned to campus. An increasing number of international students from abroad were able to travel and did so to pursue their studies. At the same time, U.S. institutions continued to be flexible if international students could not travel, providing these students options to begin or continue their studies online. It is within this context that we present the data for the 21-22 academic year. The United States hosted 948,519 international students in 2021-22, an increase of 4% from the previous year. The U.S. continues to be the top destination for international students, and an increase this year highlights the rebound of student mobility less than 2 years following the outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic. Looking at the last 20 years of international student mobility trends, we have noted robust growth. Then, in 2019-20, U.S. inbound mobility witnessed an unprecedented shock due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Last year, international student numbers decreased by 15% to just over 914,000. Just 1 year later, we are seeing a rebound of international student numbers by 4% to almost 950,000 international students. This is a testament to the efforts of U.S. colleges and universities to welcome international students despite the pandemic and international students' desires to pursue their study abroad here. Several factors contributed to the 4% increase in international student totals. First, we saw a resounding rebound in new international student enrollment. New international students are those studying at their U.S. college or university for the first time. Last year, due to COVID-19, new enrollments dropped by 46% from over 267,000 to approximately 146,000, as many international students decided to defer their enrollment or pause their academic plans. In 2021-22, new enrollments soared 80% to 261,961 students. This brings new international student totals to pre-pandemic levels. Notably, new enrollments increased at all academic levels. When we look at new international students as a proportion of all international students, we see an improving trend from last year. Last year, we noted that many international students likely deferred their studies due to the pandemic and travel restrictions. As a result, only 16% of all international students were beginning their studies. This year, this percentage has increased. This brings us back to proportions before the pandemic, when between 25 and 30% of all international students were new students each year. This ensures a steady stream of new students entering the international education pipeline at U.S. institutions. International students at U.S. colleges and universities studied at every academic level and pursued work opportunities on OPT. Undergraduate and graduate students accounted for over 75% of all international students, and over 184,000 students were on OPT. When we look at these totals further, we note the strong rebound of graduate enrollments at 17%. These increases, particularly at the master's level, were likely due to pent-up demand and deferrals in the prior year. The total number of graduate students was higher than the pre-pandemic total reported in 2019-20. There were more graduate students at U.S. colleges and universities than undergraduates for the first time in a decade. Undergraduate enrollments continued to decline at 4%, though it is important to note that first-year bachelor's or freshman totals increased by 20%. The number of students pursuing OPT decreased for a second year by 9%. This year, in addition to overall OPT easing, we noted the realities of smaller undergraduate and graduate numbers in the past year due to COVID-19, which further reduced the total pool of students eligible to pursue OPT. Finally, students pursuing non-degree studies, such as short-term exchanges or intensive English programs, increased significantly by 61%. A primary draw of international students in the United States is the holistic experience they receive on U.S. campuses. Last year, we found that less than half of all international students could pursue their studies in person, as primarily hybrid study models were in place to protect the health and safety of students, faculty, and staff. This year, the vast majority of students were able to either travel to the United States or pursue their studies in person if they were already stateside. 90% of all international students reported in 2021-22 were on a U.S. campus. The United States hosts international students from around the world. The top 3 places of origin in 2021-22 continued to be China, India, and South Korea. As in previous years, China and India made up 52% of the total international student population. Significant numbers of international students in the United States were from each region of the world, including Asia, Europe, Latin America, the Middle East, and Africa. So let's take a closer look at our places of origin. China continued to be the leading place of origin with 290,086 international students, a 9% decline from the prior year. Over the past 7 years, we have seen more Chinese undergraduate students studying in the U.S. than graduate students. But we saw this trend reverse in 2021-22. The highest proportion of Chinese students, or 43%, studied at the graduate level with over 123,000 students. The number of international students from India increased by 19%. With 182 Indian students, we are back to pre-pandemic levels and approaching the all-time high of Indian students, which was over 202,000 in 2018-19. The increase in Indian students was primarily due to graduate students. Over half of all Indian students in the United States were graduate students. India also remains the primary place of origin for international students pursuing OPT, with over 68,000 Indian students in the U.S. Our third place of origin, South Korea, saw an increase of 3% to 40,755 students. The proportion of South Korean students in the U.S. has, for the past 20 years or so, primarily included undergraduate students, and this remains the case this year as well. 45% of all South Korean students in the U.S. were undergraduates, with over 18,000 students. The diversity of international students at U.S. colleges and universities highlights the resilience of international educational exchange amid COVID-19. Of all 219 places of origin, 126 experienced an increase from the previous year. This was 58% of the total, showing that throughout the world, the number of international students who chose the United States as their study abroad destination increased. And 15 of the top 25 places of origin returned to or near pre-pandemic levels. Now, a few years ago, we highlighted several emerging international student markets. Today, we return to these 4 places of origin, Nigeria, Bangladesh, Pakistan, and Colombia, to highlight rebounds since the COVID-19 pandemic. All 4 of these places of origin experienced growth prior to the pandemic, as we can see in gray. After the decreases experienced last year, these markets are experiencing numbers exceeding pre-pandemic totals. In Nigeria, the total number of international students matches numbers in the 1980s. Notably, Bangladesh, Pakistan, and Colombia have reached all-time highs of international students studying at U.S. colleges and universities. International students are welcome to study at U.S. colleges and universities across the country, making up 5% of all U.S. higher education enrollment. There is considerable room for international students at our institutions. California, New York, and Massachusetts were the top 3 destinations for international students. Completing the picture of COVID-19 rebounds, it is encouraging to see that 36 of the 50 states and Washington, D.C. experienced an increase compared to the previous year. Over half of all international students in the 21-22 academic year studied in the STEM fields. We have seen some changes in the top fields of study in the last year. Math and computer science has surpassed engineering as the leading field of study for international students. Growing by 10%, there were 200,301 math and computer students at U.S. institutions. Engineering was the only top field of study that continued to experience a slight decrease of 1% to 188,194 students. Business and management, social sciences, and physical and life sciences also increased. When we look at all fields of study as a proportion of the whole, we continue to see that 1 in 2 international students in the United States pursues STEM fields. But we do see a difference when we break down these fields of study by academic level. Undergraduate students prefer business and management as their fields of study, while graduates mainly study engineering or math and computer science. As a result, when we compare students in STEM at the undergraduate level versus the graduate level, we see a difference in the overall composition. According to the Department of Commerce, international students contributed $32 billion to the U.S. economy in 2021. Over half of all international students contributed international funding sources, particularly personal funds, to fund their education. This number is particularly high for undergraduate students, who often finance their education. Graduate students, whose numbers grew significantly this year, were funded by international and U.S. sources, including their U.S. college or university, and often research funding, employment, and OPT. Now, before I conclude, I want to touch on some of the findings from the Fall 2022 International Student Enrollment Snapshot. The snapshot is a joint endeavor between IIE and 9 other international education organizations and presents international student enrollment patterns for the current 2022-23 academic year. This year, we received data from 638 U.S. higher education institutions, a subset of the institutions we surveyed as part of Open Doors. The profile of these institutions closely resembles that of institutions represented in Open Doors. I want to highlight 4 key findings from the Fall 2022 snapshot. Our first finding is that in Fall 2022, the number of international students continues to increase by 9%. This signals a continued increase of international students at U.S. colleges and universities and a 2-year rebound of 13%. 94% of international students were located on U.S. campuses. Second, the number of international students has grown across all academic levels. We continue to see significant growth in graduates at 18% and an increase in undergraduates at 2%. Finally, we are pleased to see that the number of students on OPT has increased by 6%. This is after a 2-year decline in numbers and likely driven by the surge in the number of graduate students reported in Open Doors 2022, which I just presented on. A third finding is that new international students beginning their studies continue to increase at 7%, building on the strong rebound of 80% last year. 64% of reporting institutions are noting slight or substantial increases in new enrollments this fall. And finally, international student outreach and recruitment continue to be a priority for U.S. institutions. 87% of reporting institutions indicated that financial support for international student recruitment was the same or higher than in 21-22. Institutions continue to leverage a wide array of options to attract prospective international students to their campus. That concludes my portion, and I now introduce Julie Baer, who will review the data highlights regarding U.S. students studying abroad.
Thank you, Mirka. My name is Julie Baer, and I am pleased to present some of the Open Doors 2022 key findings on U.S. students studying abroad. I first want to briefly go over the information we collected on U.S. study abroad in Open Doors 2022. We surveyed accredited colleges and universities across the United States with study abroad programs. Our data collection focuses on U.S. students enrolled at U.S. higher education institutions who then go abroad for academic credit. We counted students who studied abroad during the 2020-21 academic year from fall 2020 through summer 2021. This is 1 year prior to the year Mirka just referenced for international students. The reason for this time lag is that we need to allow time for students to go abroad, come back home, and then be awarded credit at their U.S. institution. I want to pause here and take a step back to remember where we were during this period of time in 2020 through 2021, as the data from this reporting cycle documents the full effects of the COVID-19 pandemic on U.S. study abroad. In early 2020, COVID-19 had been declared a pandemic, and we knew that study abroad had largely been suspended, according to data from IIE's COVID-19 Snapshot Survey. Furthermore, during the reporting cycle, vaccines were not yet available as of the fall of 2020. Many destinations were classified as do not travel as of spring 2021, and the Delta variant was spreading throughout the world. As such, U.S. higher education institutions took proactive steps to safeguard the health and well-being of students, faculty, and staff, as well as destination institutions, partners, and communities. In the 2020-21 academic year, 14,549 U.S. students studied abroad for academic credit. This represents a 91% decline since last year, as U.S. higher education institutions suspended programs to responsibly safeguard global public health. When we look at the historical trend of U.S. study abroad, it is important to understand the context prior to the pandemic as we look to the future of study abroad. Before the COVID-19 pandemic, the number of American students studying abroad had been steadily increasing, with over 347,000 students studying abroad in 2018-19. Due to the COVID-19 pandemic, many U.S. higher education institutions suspended programs, resulting in a 96% decline in U.S. study abroad over the past 2 years. The decline in study abroad was evident across many study abroad durations, Most colleges and universities suspended study abroad programs in the fall of 2020 and the spring of 2021, with fewer than 7,000 students reported as studying abroad during the academic year. Early indications, however, point to the return of study abroad, with an uptick in the number of students traveling overseas in the summer 2021 in comparison to the prior year. Over half of all study abroad during this academic year occurred in the summer of 2021. When looking at where American students studied, Europe continued to be the predominant destination for study abroad, with nearly 2/3 of students studying in this region. Reflecting this regional trend, Italy, Spain, the United Kingdom, and France remained the leading host destinations, with nearly half of all students studying in these top 4 destinations. Many of the leading destinations during this time period reflect places that continued to allow travel amid the pandemic, and destinations with historical institutional relationships or institutional branch campuses that could continue to safely welcome students. While the majority of Americans traveled to traditional destinations in Europe, we found that small numbers of students continued to study in diverse destinations globally, with students traveling to 130 places around the world. I now want to look at the characteristics of U.S. students studying abroad, which is important to understand as U.S. colleges and universities look to diversify opportunities for students in the future. The proportion of underrepresented students from diverse racial and ethnic backgrounds studying abroad has grown over the past 20 years. And in the 2020-21 academic year, approximately 32% of students came from diverse racial or ethnic backgrounds. However, it is important to put these proportions into the broader context of U.S. higher education. As institutions look to the future of study abroad, continued focus in this area is necessary to align with the national U.S. student enrollment trend. When we compare this to the overall U.S. higher education population, 46% of all U.S. students identified as students of color. So we still have work to do to make study abroad opportunities available and accessible to students from all backgrounds. Business and management and the social sciences have long been the most popular majors for students pursuing study abroad and remain so in the 2020-21 academic year. Among the STEM fields, the largest proportions went abroad from the physical and life sciences and the engineering fields. We note that students go abroad from a wide array of majors, and institutions are continuing to encourage students to participate in global opportunities, as research has shown that study abroad is an enriching, high-impact practice that leads to improved educational and workforce outcomes for students of all majors and backgrounds. Institutions seeking to support students who could not participate in a study abroad program outside the United States in 2020-21 offered students a wide variety of online global learning experiences. As a result, in addition to the over 14,000 students who studied abroad, more than 32,000 students received academic credit for participating in online global learning experiences. This is an area where we've seen tremendous growth in institutional reporting over the past year. In 2019-20, approximately 250 institutions reported students taking part in online global learning opportunities. In 2020-21, 427 institutions provided data about students participating in these programs, nearly double the number of institutions that reported data in the prior year. This showcases how U.S. colleges and universities nimbly reacted to provide online options when students were unable to travel due to the COVID-19 pandemic. U.S. colleges and universities provided a wide array of online opportunities for students to gain global educational experiences. The most popular online experiences included internships and consulting with global companies, courses paired across institutions that work together, collaborative project-based learning, and video conference dialogues. Furthermore, over half of all institutions indicated that they offered multiple types of online global learning. These virtual educational experiences provided a critical way for students to continue gaining valuable global insights and perspectives, especially during the height of the pandemic when students were unable to travel. Another way that study abroad has diversified is through the types of activities that students pursue. In addition to 4-credit study abroad, which all of my previous slides focused on, institutions may offer non-credit study abroad opportunities, providing a wealth of unique experiences for students. In the 2020-21 academic year, just over 100 institutions reported that more than 1,500 U.S. students participated in an experiential activity and did not receive credit at their home campuses for their time abroad. We found that the most popular activity among non-credit study abroad was participating in work or internships, with 35% of students engaged in this type of activity. Other non-credit activities included volunteering, field experiences, research, conferences, or performing arts trips abroad. Finally, as study abroad reemerges following the height of the COVID-19 pandemic, early indications from IIE's snapshot surveys indicate a rebound in study abroad. Over the past 2 years, IIE has collected data from hundreds of higher education institutions regarding the state of study abroad. Across these responses, we have noted several key areas related to the return of study abroad. The first is that the vast majority of U.S. colleges and universities continued to promote study abroad throughout the pandemic, likely due to the numerous benefits of study abroad personally, professionally, and academically. Furthermore, the majority of institutions noted that demand for study abroad was stable or went up amid the pandemic as students remained interested in opportunities to study abroad. Once it became safer to travel with widespread vaccinations and increased safety protocols, the majority of colleges and universities anticipated growth in study abroad in the current 22-23 academic year. Aligned with this, nearly all institutions surveyed noted that they had returned to in-person study abroad opportunities. While many institutions continued to offer online educational learning opportunities due to the benefits of engaging students who may not otherwise have the opportunity to study abroad, the vast majority of colleges and universities indicated that online global opportunities are not intended to replace in-person study abroad. As Dr. Goodman noted in his remarks, the international education field has been resilient, and educational exchange often rebounds following crises. While institutions suspended programs at the height of the COVID-19 pandemic to responsibly safeguard students, faculty, and host communities, all indications point to a reemergence of study abroad for the future. And we look forward to working with the field to tell this story in the years to come. I will now turn this over to my colleague, Leah Mason, to speak about trends in global student mobility.
Thank you, Julie. My name is Leah Mason. Now that we have an understanding of mobility to and from the United States, I would like to look at the broader picture of global student mobility. Project Atlas was created in 2001 to contextualize the Open Doors data and see how it fits in the global picture of other host countries, attracting larger numbers of international students. Today, Project Atlas has 30 partner organizations that are part of the national data collection in their country and that share with us the information they have on international students coming to their country using the same definition that Open Doors uses. Recognizing it is a complicated time, I want to acknowledge that the country data shared by our partners and described in this section of the presentation represents slightly different periods due to variations in national data collection schedules. However, the data show the effect of the COVID-19 pandemic period and reflect the various entrance and exit hurdles that international students faced as higher education institutions and countries managed the COVID-19 pandemic. I want to thank all the Project Atlas partners that shared information about international students and the higher education context in their countries this year. International student mobility has grown significantly over the past 20 years. The UNESCO Institute for Statistics reported that the total number of globally mobile international students reached 6.4 million in the 2019-20 academic year, more than double the number of students who crossed a border to study in 2006-07. In this trend line, you can see that the rate of growth has increased steadily upwards over the past 20 years, with the average per year growth in the number of international students from 2000 to 2020 at 5%. As the UNESCO data does not yet reflect the effect of the COVID-19 pandemic on global academic mobility, we return to the Project Atlas data for a closer look at the COVID-19 period. The COVID-19 pandemic shifted global student mobility patterns. As such, we see variations in traditional trends among leading host destinations for international students. The United States remains the #1 host of international students, hosting 15% of the total number of international students. And while the Project Atlas data show that the United Kingdom has maintained its position since Project Atlas began collecting data and held a consistent proportion of the international student total over the past 2 years, the other leading hosts have changed positions over time as more countries host international students. We see here that the proportion of all other countries hosting international students is larger than ever before. Although students from all countries cross a border to pursue their higher education studies, students from China and India seek degrees in countries among the leading hosts of international students. Among Project Atlas partners, China was the leading place of origin for international students, with more than 900,000 students enrolled at a higher education institution outside China. The top 5 host destinations of international students from China host 73% of Chinese students and include the United States, Australia, the United Kingdom, Canada, and Japan. India was the second largest sender of international students, with Project Atlas partners reporting more than 600,000 Indian students enrolled at a higher education institution outside India. The top 5 host destinations of international students from India host 96% of Indian students and include Canada, the United States, the United Kingdom, Australia, and Germany. As countries globally look to attract international students, it is important also to acknowledge the continued capacity for institutions to host international students. Looking at the leading Anglophone countries, we see that international students represented approximately 25% of the total higher education populations in Australia, Canada, and the United Kingdom, each of which has fewer higher education institutions than the United States. The capacity issue is further complicated by the number of international students focused on similar fields of study, namely STEM fields, which, at the institutional level affects the institutional capacity to satisfy the growing demand of international students in these specific areas. With more than 4,000 higher education colleges and universities, the United States has the most capacity to host international students at an institution that fits their academic aspirations. In the 2021-22 academic year, international students represented only 5% of U.S. higher education institutions' total enrollment. Therefore, the United States has a greater capacity to host additional international students, while other leading hosts may be limited by the size of their higher education sector. As we look to the future of academic mobility, our Project Atlas partners shared that the following factors affect mobility in their context now and will influence future international student enrollments. The first is the effect of the COVID-19 pandemic. Each country handled the pandemic differently. As such, there are large differences both among countries and within countries. International student mobility has been affected by border closures and institution closures of varying lengths, as well as deferred student enrollments and pent-up demand for international study. Second is the expansion of higher education globally. Today, more students are pursuing tertiary study than ever before. This is influenced by several factors, including birth rates, government initiatives to increase tertiary attainment, and employment opportunities through tertiary education. At the same time, we are witnessing an era of a growing number of refugees and displaced persons due to conflict and natural disasters. This affects long-term academic displacement as international students and scholars who flee countries have fewer options to continue their academic work. Technological innovations through the COVID-19 pandemic have opened doors to new ways of teaching and learning. Technology is also closely connected with an increasing focus on sustainability, which we know some countries are discussing more seriously. Technology may be one way to address sustainable international academic exchange. Before concluding our presentation today, we want to share several resources. We invite you to the Open Doors website to explore, download, and share the Open Doors data. Today, all of the 2022 data has been updated and is available. We invite you to please take a moment to explore the website and our newest data. We also want to thank the organizations that made today possible. First and foremost, we want to thank the U.S. Department of State for its continued support of the Open Doors project. Please access the State Department resources noted on this slide to learn more about how you can celebrate the benefits of international education and exchange worldwide during International Education Week, and connect with Education USA and USA Study Abroad. We also want to thank our many partners on Open Doors, organizations that help us review and distribute the Open Doors surveys each year. We want to highlight our partners who worked with us on the Fall 2022 Snapshot Survey. And this project would not be possible without the 3,000 U.S. higher education institutions that receive our survey and take the time to respond each year. Thank you. Finally, we invite you to continue the conversation. Please reach out to Open Doors for any data inquiries or to discuss a custom analysis. For any press inquiries, please email press@iie.org to join the conversation on social media. Use our Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn icons in the upper right of the screen, and tag your post to ensure that Open Doors remains part of the discussion. We want to thank you for listening today and wish you a pleasant day.